Hello everybody and welcome to our open cluster meeting which would have been held in Aberdeen. This is the QAA Enhancement Themes Collaborative Cluster, Widening Participation with Lecture Recording. My name is Jill MacKay. I'm the core team from Edinburgh. Not with me today, but with us in spirit, virtually online, are Emily Nordmann, who is the Glasgow representative, and Jacqui Hutchison, who is the Aberdeen representative. In this little video, we're just going to give you an update about what the cluster is doing during COVID-19 and how we can still work together to try and explore how widening participation and lecture recording affect one another. The important thing is that we recognise the effect that COVID-19 is going to have on this work. There are a number of impacts of COVID-19 on the entire sector. First and foremost, this was going to be a face-to-face all-day meeting in Aberdeen, and you'll notice that we've pivoted quite considerably to a short series of videos. We hope that we'll get some of our other participants recording what they would have done in their talks and putting that up online, or we're going to have a short Twitter chat, which I'll come on to talk about a little bit later. But it's important to recognise that the people who are interested in this cluster work are probably the people who are very pressured right now to ensure student experience and staff experience is not too affected by COVID-19. We expect that social distancing and self-isolation will be common for several months. We're expecting that most of the universities in Scotland and the further education colleges in Scotland will not be expecting their students back until September. And I think we should acknowledge that there is a particular effect on this cluster. We came last meeting in December to an equality, diversity and inclusion viewpoint on widening participation. And a lot of the barriers that many people face in getting into higher and further education, and a lot of the challenges that even staff who come from widening participation backgrounds face while working in the education sector, are perhaps more affected by COVID-19. They are more insecure, they may have different health concerns, they may have caring responsibilities that they can't necessarily get rid of. And we are all working together in a slightly different environment. You may be able to hear some typing in the background and my cat meowing in the background because we're all working from home right now in a very different kind of environment. And we have to recognise that the kind of things we were maybe hoping to get from this cluster are going to have to pivot in the same way. So please bear that in mind as we go through the rest of this. So what are we going to do in future? Well, this was going to be meeting 2, which was going to be held on the 3rd of April up in lovely sunny Aberdeen. As you can see, we're pivoting that to these short pre-recorded sessions to try and get some more information out to the cluster, and we're going to try and keep some of the interactivity element through a Twitter chat. We're going to be using the hashtag LecRecChat, and I'm going to come on to talk a bit more about this at the end, on the 3rd of April, and we're going to do that from 1 till 2. So hopefully it'll be quite a nice, relaxing way to spend your Friday lunchtime. We've got a couple of questions for you to think about and some homework. And if you don't have access to Twitter, you can still follow along on the chat by going to our Twitter page. And if you want to sign up to Twitter, this may be the thing that pushes you into that. Meeting 3 was going to be in Glasgow on the 15th of May in 2020. We are going to move this meeting online and we would ask you to stay tuned for further updates. We had also been really excited about the Enhancement Themes Conference in June in Glasgow. That is as well pivoting online. We'd been hoping to run a large discussion session there, and we're not totally sure how we're going to run that now, but we are working with QA Scotland to discuss different options that we have there. If anyone's got any bright ideas, this is an open cluster. We really do hope that you're all contributing to this and thinking about this. So if you get any bright ideas, do let us know. So what do we know about widening participation with lecture recording? In our meeting in Edinburgh in December, we asked people to visualise their ideal world, and we've shared some of this on our Twitter, so you may be familiar. But we heard lots about empowering students, about giving spaces for collaboration, about complementing the kind of studies that students may be doing during transitions, giving them some opportunity to view what university and higher education looks like before they enter, using ambassadors to support the use of learning capture, and sort of having a beautiful free world where there was no underlying need to monetize the way that we look at our students. One of the things that we discussed during the previous meeting was this idea that lecture recording is not a silver bullet for the issues that widening participation students face. In fact, there could be some real concerns about lecture recording perhaps facilitating a little bit more isolation and distance from the community within higher education for widening participation students. And so a lot of what we were visualizing in our ideal scenarios was a fully engaged student regardless of where they were and regardless of where their priorities were, whether that was within caring or within a part-time job, or if they were able to focus on their studies, they were still going to be able to engage in an equal and fair way. This is something that I think we really want to consider now that most of the Scottish universities have pivoted online and that we're really entering a new phase in the prevalence of distance learning. And something that we definitely want to consider in terms of accessibility, because we have to acknowledge as well that the kind of distance learning and online teaching that is happening right now is not the kind of pre-planned course that a university or an institution has taken a lot of time thinking and considering. This has been an emergency pivot. And so are those accessibility issues perhaps widened? We, in the core cluster team, were going to do two things before the Aberdeen meeting. We were going to give you a brief overview of the sector's view from their policies, and we were going to run our focus group. This is just a brief summary of what the sector talks about at a policy level. We see that in the 33 institutions that we sampled, just as a reminder, there's 15 HE providers and 20 FE providers in Scotland, but we decided that it wasn't really fair to include Glasgow School of Art and the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in this review because of the type of teaching that they do. However, if you guys, if any representatives from you guys have some information that you want to give us or can point towards your policies, we would also be really interested in that. And we found that there was really very few lecture recording policies published and available to prospective students. And of those, the majority were opt-in, so that's 12% of our sample, and 9% were opt-out samples. However, a further 9% of institutions did reference lecture recording in their widening participation policies. And that could be as simple as saying that students are allowed to make recordings for their own use, but this is still an element of lecture recording that we should consider. So we are starting from a place where there isn't really widespread acceptance in the sector of here is how to do it, or if there is, we haven't formalized that in a way that students are able to access. And I think that means that as a cluster, one of the things we can do is provide really useful guidance for the sector in future. And we wanted to marry that sector perspective with this perspective and the experience of students who are actually studying in Scottish HE at the moment. So we ran 4 focus groups and we recruited students through our widening participation team. So this was generally students who had been part of an access course. We had 4 students at Aberdeen, we had 2 focus groups at Glasgow, one of 4 and one of 3 students, and we had 4 students in a focus group in Edinburgh. Slight difference about the Edinburgh one is that ended up being an online text chat because it was after the COVID-19 online pivot. So a slightly different format. The focus groups were run by ourselves as in the core team, and we used a similar focus group structure with similar questions throughout. The focus groups were then transcribed, except for the online text chat one, and a thematic analysis is currently underway. But we can give you a little bit of a heads up of what students are experiencing when they're sort of considering how widening participation and lecture recording interact. Something that's been very clear from the start is that widening participation students are having a different experience at university than perhaps you might consider the traditional university experience. A Glasgow participant said, "My friends on their courses seem to have a lot more free time, even when they do the same as I do, like, have quite a lot of classes and work part-time and all that." An Aberdeen student said, "For me, for university, it's more just coming in, listening to lectures, using the library. I kind of just do see it as more of an academic thing, and then alongside I do work and stuff, so that's where I get my other things in." And then an Edinburgh participant said, "I understand that. I travel into Edinburgh and my partner does night shifts, so it can be a handoff of the children at night. My average commute is 2 hours." So our widening participation students at all of these different universities are having a different kind of experience. They're balancing other demands on their time and perhaps also different priorities about life in general. We also saw that financial concerns were very strong within this self-selecting group of students. A Glasgow participant said, "I live quite far away and it costs me quite a lot of money to get in, so on the days only when I need to come in for an hour or for 2 hours, if there's lecture recordings there, I won't come in." An Aberdeen participant says, "A lot of times I have to work, and if your lecture isn't compulsory, then having the, okay, I don't absolutely have to be there. I can go to work and earn money and stuff, and then I can come back to it at another time." And an Edinburgh participant says, "Then I quit and I went into full-time uni. I keep thinking that I'm being a burden on my family financially for doing this, especially right now." And I think that particular quote from the Edinburgh student, remembering that those students were doing this focus group online because of the post-COVID-19 online pivot. I think that's a really important perspective that we do need to keep in our minds when we're discussing how these students are experiencing education. And we also had a great deal of discussion about student transitions. A Glasgow participant says, "I came from the Access course and all the teaching was very much geared towards what would be in the exam. It was very much spoon-fed, and here it's completely different." An Aberdeen participant says, "I go home and I'm writing an essay. I plan it, but I'm not doing the right thing. But it's so hard to find, like you've got to find out those things yourself rather than just go and ask your teacher." And an Edinburgh participant says, "I might actually be an imposter," smiley emoji. "I had a comparatively very easy route into Edinburgh University. Then I came to uni and it was like 5 levels up." I think what's really interesting about these three perspectives is that these students have very high goals and standards for themselves and they worry about meeting them. And they do find the transition into university work challenging, even though these are all students who were recruited into these focus groups because they had experienced some kind of access or transition easing. And if we're talking about how widening participation can help, perhaps that really underlines the fact that it would be really useful for schools and for communities to have access to what university looks like these days. You might also argue that there could be a real question as to how we do support the students that we have in higher education sector, but I could be dangerously close to a rant there, so I'm going to switch to the next slide. I hope that these observations of what's happening in the sector and the student experience, coupled with what we sort of saw and felt after the last meeting, has gotten all the neurons firing in your head and you're desperate to now chat about what we can do as a cluster, as a sector, to try and improve the experience of widening participation students with some of the new technologies that we have at hand. So we're taking to Twitter. This is now the replacement for the open meeting that we would have had up in Aberdeen. You can follow us on Twitter at lecturecptr, lecture capture, and using the hashtag LecRecChat, we are going to be hosting a tweet chat on Friday the 3rd of April at 1 p.m. We hope that you join us with a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, maybe even a little soft drink, and perhaps some lunch. And we have 3 questions that we want you to think about and discuss. And if you have any questions that you think would be a really good one to feed into the chat, please tweet us ahead of time and we'll add that too. Question 1 is, how does COVID-19 impact widening participation agendas? Question 2 is, where are we seeing good practice with lecture recording and widening participation? If you've got an amazing project sitting there, or if your institution's doing something that we need to know about, now's the time to tell us. Don't let imposter syndrome get in your way. We really need to know what you're doing that's good. And then question 3, how can we support transitions? I hope that you join us on Twitter, and I hope that you are all staying safe and healthy. And we will see you on Twitter on the 3rd of April.